Have you ever seen someone so blinded by their own privilege they can't see the cliff they're about to walk off? On the legendary Royal Caledonian Express, a titan of Wall Street named Alistair Finch thought he was untouchable. He saw a black woman holding a first-class ticket and laughed, convinced she was in the wrong place. But he wasn't just wrong about her ticket. He was wrong about who she was, what she was doing there, and the power she held. He thought he was laughing at a misplaced passenger. He had no idea he was mocking the woman who held his entire future in her hands. Stay tuned, because this isn't just a story of a mistake, it's a story of a reckoning. The air at King's Cross Station Platform 1 didn't smell of soot and diesel. It smelled of money. It was a crisp September afternoon, and the legendary Royal Caledonian sleeper train stood gleaming like a dark green serpent trimmed in polished brass. This wasn't a commuter train, it was a rolling five-star hotel, a time capsule of Edwardian elegance on its exclusive journey to the heart of the Scottish Highlands. Entry to its hallowed carriages was a statement, a quiet declaration that you had not only arrived in life, but you had done so with an expense account to prove it. Dr. Eris Thorne stood slightly apart from the other passengers, a portrait of calm amidst the quiet bustle. She wore a tailored camel coat over a simple but exquisitely cut cashmere dress, her luggage a matching set of classic, well-loved leather. She wasn't looking at the train, but through it, her mind drifting back decades. Her grandfather Thomas Thorne had worked these platforms. He was a Pullman porter, a man of immense dignity in a job that offered little. He'd spent 40 years polishing brass, carrying the luggage of the wealthy, and dreaming of one day sitting in the velvet seats he so carefully cleaned. He used to tell her, "Ari, they see the uniform, not the man. But one day you'll ride this train and they'll see you." This trip wasn't just a luxury vacation. It was a pilgrimage. It was the closing of a circle, a silent promise kept to a man long gone. Her quiet reflection was broken by a braying laugh that sliced through the refined atmosphere. "Eleanor, darling, do look at this," a voice boomed, dripping with the kind of inherited arrogance that no amount of money could actually buy. "It seems the marketing department has gotten a bit too inclusive." Aris turned her head slightly. The speaker was Alistair Finch, a man whose face was frequently plastered across financial magazines. He was the CEO of Finch and Sterling Capital, a third-generation hedge fund manager who had never known a day of genuine struggle. He was handsome, in a severe, joyless way, his silvering hair perfectly coiffed. Beside him, his wife Eleanor, a woman sculpted by surgeons and starved by ambition, offered a thin, conspiratorial smile. They were a matched set of polished condescension. Finch's gaze was fixed on Aris. He wasn't looking at her, but rather at her ticket, the corner of which peeked from her gloved hand. He gestured with his chin, a smirk playing on his lips. "Perhaps she's won a competition. A lovely little diversity initiative, I'm sure." Eleanor giggled, a sound like ice cubes rattling in an empty glass. "Oh, Alistair, don't be cruel. She's probably an influencer. Here to take pictures for her. You know, her followers." Aris met Finch's gaze directly. Her expression didn't flicker. She offered no anger, no defensiveness. She simply held his stare with a placid, unnerving stillness that seemed to bother him more than any outburst would have. He expected indignation or shame. He received only serene observation, as if a scientist were examining a curious insect. He frowned, his bravado faltering for a split second, before puffing his chest out once more. A uniformed attendant with a warm smile approached Aris. "Dr. Thorne, welcome aboard. We have you in cabin 7A. May I take your luggage?" "Thank you, James," she said, her voice warm and clear. "I can manage the carry-on." As she stepped towards the carriage door, she had to pass the Finches. Alistair made no move to step aside. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a mock confidential whisper that was perfectly audible to everyone around them. "Just a word of advice," he murmured, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "The dining car has a rather strict dress code. They probably didn't mention that in the contest brochure." Eris paused, her eyes locking onto his. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. Finch," she said, her tone level and cool. "A word of advice for you. It is a poor craftsman who blames his tools, and an even poorer man who mistakes his privilege for merit. You would do well to remember that." She then stepped past him, leaving him momentarily speechless, a faint blush creeping up his neck. He watched her disappear into the train, his eyes narrowing into slits. He had intended to put her in her place. Instead, she had held a mirror up to him, and he did not like the reflection. For Alistair Finch, this was no longer a simple train journey. It had become a matter of principle. He was determined to prove that she didn't belong. Once aboard, the Royal Caledonian was even more magnificent. The corridors were narrow, but exquisitely appointed with polished mahogany panels inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Brass lamps cast a warm golden glow, and thick-piled carpets muffled every footstep. Eris found her cabin 7A to be a masterpiece of compact luxury, a comfortable velvet armchair, a small writing desk, and a window that would soon frame the rolling British countryside. It was beautiful, exactly as her grandfather had described. She decided to head to the observation car for a pre-departure glass of champagne. The car was at the rear of the train, with a curved glass ceiling and large panoramic windows. It was already filling up with the low hum of polite conversation. She found a small table for two and settled in, watching the last of the passengers board on the platform below. Moments later, the Finches swept in, making an entrance as if they were royalty arriving at a state dinner. Alistair scanned the car, his eyes landing on Eris. A cruel smile touched his lips. It was a golden opportunity. He guided Eleanor to the table directly adjacent to hers. "Ah, perfect," he said loudly. "A marvelous view." He proceeded to ignore Eris completely, instead launching into a loud monologue about his recent acquisition of a Swiss watchmaker name-dropping celebrities and politicians. It was a performance, and Eris was meant to be the intimidated audience. A steward, impeccably dressed in a white jacket, arrived to check tickets and take drink orders. He approached the Finches first, bowing slightly. "Mr. and Mrs. Finch, a pleasure to have you with us again. The usual—" "Of course, Charles. A bottle of the Bollinger 08, Alistair said, handing over his ticket without a glance. The steward then turned to Eris. "Good afternoon, madam. May I see your ticket?" Eris retrieved her ticket from her handbag and presented it. As she did, Alistair Finch leaned over with theatrical slowness, craning his neck to look. His eyes widened in mock surprise, and then he let out that same ugly laugh. It wasn't just a laugh. It was a pronouncement. It was sharp, condescending, and designed to draw attention. Several heads turned. "My dear woman," Finch chuckled, shaking his head, as if she were a lost child. "I am so terribly sorry. It seems you've made a rather understandable mistake." Eris simply raised an eyebrow. "Have I?" "Yes," he said, pointing a manicured finger at her ticket. "This is a first-class cabin ticket. A very nice one, I'm sure. But this," he said, gesturing expansively around the opulent car, "is the Pullman Club car. It's reserved exclusively for Pullman Suite passengers. It's a different booking entirely. An easy mistake to make the booking website can be quite confusing for newcomers." Eleanor chimed in, her voice laced with false sympathy. "The staff should have caught it at the door. They're usually so diligent. Charles, you must help this poor lady find her way to the correct lounge." The steward, Charles, looked deeply uncomfortable. He glanced from the Finches to Eris, his professional poise strained. "Madam, Finch cut him off. "There's no need to be embarrassed," he said to Eris, his voice dripping with paternalistic condescension. "The standard first-class lounge is 2 carriages forward. I'm sure you'll find it perfectly adequate." The implication was clear. You don't belong here. You can't afford to be here. Your very presence is a clerical error. The other passengers were now openly staring, a mixture of curiosity and discomfort on their faces. For a moment, the only sounds were the faint hum of the train's generators and the clinking of ice in a distant glass. Aris did not flush. She did not stammer. She simply folded her hands on the small table and looked at Alistair Finch, her gaze penetrating. "Mr. Finch," she began, her voice calm and measured, cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "You seem to have appointed yourself the unofficial custodian of this train's seating arrangements. It's a bold career change from finance. Tell me, does it pay well?" A few suppressed snickers rippled through the car. Finch's smile tightened. "I'm merely trying to prevent you from further embarrassment." "The only person embarrassing himself here is you," Ares replied smoothly. "You've made 3 assumptions in under a minute, all of them incorrect. First, you assumed I am a newcomer to this service. Second, you assumed I am in the wrong carriage. And third, and most insultingly, you assumed that my presence here is an anomaly that needs your personal correction. My ticket is valid, I am in the correct car, and I would thank you to direct your unsolicited assistance elsewhere." Her words were precise, unemotional, and devastating. Finch, accustomed to sycophants and subordinates, was momentarily stunned. He was about to retort, his face darkening with anger, when a new figure appeared at the entrance to the car. He was a tall, distinguished man in his late 60s with silver hair and an impeccably tailored uniform that marked him as senior staff. His name tag read, "Mr. Davies, Train Manager." His eyes scanned the car, took in the tableau of the standoff, and a look of profound concern crossed his features. He walked directly not to the Finches, but to Eris's table. He bowed his head slightly, his expression one of deep, formal respect. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice a rich baritone that commanded the attention of the entire car. "My sincerest apologies for the delay. We were just putting the final touches on your accommodations." Alistair Finch stared, his mouth slightly agape. Dr. Thorne Eris smiled warmly at the manager. "It's no trouble at all, Mr. Davies. I was just being entertained, Mr." Davies's eyes flickered towards Finch for a nanosecond, a universe of disapproval contained in the glance. He then returned his focus to Aris. "Dr. Thorne, a message has come through from the owner's office, from Mr. Blackwood himself. He was mortified to learn you were booked into a standard cabin. He insists, and I must stress he was very, very insistent, that you be moved immediately. He has instructed me to escort you personally to the Balmoral suite." The entire car went silent. The Balmoral suite wasn't just a room. It was a legend. It was the owner's private carriage at the very front of the train, a sprawling apartment on wheels with its own staff, a private library, and a dining room. It was used only by the reclusive billionaire owner Silas Blackwood and his most esteemed personal guests. It wasn't available for public booking at any price. Alistair Finch's face, which had been turning a blotchy red, suddenly went pale. He stared at Aris, then at the manager, then back at Aris. The cogs in his brain were turning, trying to process this new, impossible information. He had laughed at her ticket, a simple first-class ticket. And now she was being personally upgraded by order of the owner to a suite that made his own Pullman cabin look like a broom closet. Mr. Davies extended a hand. "If you would be so kind as to follow me, Doctor, your luggage has already been transferred. We can arrange for your champagne to be sent directly to the suite." Aris stood, her movements fluid and graceful. She gave a small, polite nod to the stunned car. As she passed Alistair Finch's table, she paused for a brief moment and leaned in just as he had done to her on the platform. "Enjoy the Bollinger, Mr. Finch," she whispered, a hint of steel in her voice. "I'm told the vintage in the Balmoral cellar is significantly better." And with that, she followed the manager out of the car, leaving behind a wake of stunned silence, and one man whose world had just been tilted completely off its axis. The karma was just beginning to warm up. Following Mr. Davies was like passing through a secret portal. He didn't lead her forward through the public carriages. Instead, he unlocked a discreet, unmarked door at the front of the Pullman Club car, revealing a private covered passageway. The very air seemed to change. It grew quieter, the scent of lemon polish and old leather more pronounced. "Mr. Blackwood was most apologetic, Dr. Thorne," Mr. Davies said as they walked. "There was a mix-up with his personal assistant. He had intended for you to be placed here from the start. He considers you not just a business associate, but a guest of honor." "Silas is always overly gracious," Aris replied with a knowing smile. "He knows I would have been perfectly content in my original cabin." "Perhaps, Mr. Davies said, pausing before a grand paneled door with a simple, elegant brass B on it. "But Mr. Blackwood believes that excellence should be surrounded by excellence. He has the utmost respect for your work at Helios Innovations." He unlocked the door and swung it open. Aris stepped inside, and for the first time on the journey, she was genuinely taken aback. The Balmoral suite wasn't a cabin. It was a sanctuary. The main sitting room was larger than some London apartments, with a plush Chesterfield sofa walls lined with built-in mahogany bookshelves filled with leather-bound classics, and a fireplace with a realistic electric flame that flickered merrily. A small, perfectly polished baby grand piano stood in one corner. The panoramic windows were larger than in the other carriages, offering an uninterrupted view of the tracks spooling out ahead. On a small dining table for four, an ice bucket with a bottle of Krug champagne and 2 crystal flutes already waited. Davies led her through the suite. There was a spacious bedroom with a 4-poster bed, a walk-in wardrobe, and a bathroom that was a symphony of marble and brass, complete with a full-sized clawfoot bathtub. There was even a small, soundproofed office with a satellite phone and high-speed internet connection. "Your private steward Michael will be at your service for the duration of the journey," Mr. Davies explained. "He can arrange meals, drinks, or anything else you may require. You can choose to dine here in the main dining car, or Mr. Blackwood has also given you exclusive access to the conductor's deck at the very front of the engine for sunrise over the Highlands, should you wish." Aris ran a hand over the smooth, cool wood of the writing desk. Her grandfather had polished desks like this. He had dreamed of seeing inside a room like this. A wave of emotion washed over her, a poignant mix of triumph and sorrow. She had made it. She had fulfilled his dream so completely that it surpassed even his wildest imaginings. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is more than I ever expected." "It is our absolute pleasure, Dr. Thorne," he replied with a warm, genuine smile before discreetly exiting and closing the door behind him. Meanwhile, back in the Pullman Club car, Alistair Finch was stewing in a toxic brew of humiliation and rage. The champagne in his glass tasted like ash. "Who is she?" he hissed at Eleanor, keeping his voice low. "How does she know Silas Blackwood is a recluse? He barely talks to his own board of directors." "Perhaps she's one of his philanthropic projects," Eleanor offered weakly, clearly intimidated by her husband's fury. "Don't be an idiot, Eleanor," he snapped. "Philanthropy gets you a thank you note, not the keys to the kingdom. Dr. Thorne. Helios Innovations." "I've heard that name. A green tech company. Solar panels, battery storage, something like that." He pulled out his satellite-enabled smartphone, his thumbs flying across the screen with furious energy. He wasn't just embarrassed. His entire worldview had been challenged. Alistair Finch operated in a world of clear hierarchies. He was at the top. People like Eris Thorne, in his prejudiced mind, were somewhere far, far below. Her presence in a place of such honor was not just a surprise. It was a violation of the natural order of things. His search results began to populate. Dr. Eris Thorne, Ph.D., in Materials Science from MIT. Founder and CEO of Helios Innovations. Holder of dozens of patents for next-generation photovoltaic technology. A multi-hundred-million-dollar company that was on the verge of going public. Articles from Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, and Wired hailed her as a visionary, a once-in-a-generation mind revolutionizing the energy sector. Finch felt a knot of ice form in his stomach. This wasn't some contest winner or an influencer. This was a titan of industry, a self-made powerhouse who had built an empire on sheer brilliance, and he had just treated her like a vagrant who had wandered into the wrong room. "Find out everything you can about her connection to Blackwood," he snarled into his phone to an assistant back in London. "And I want a deep-dive dossier on Helios Innovations. Their financials, their partners, their contracts, their vulnerabilities. Everything. I want to know what her weaknesses are. I want to know where I can squeeze." The humiliation had curdled into something far more dangerous, a vendetta. He couldn't stand the thought of her in that magnificent suite looking down on him. He felt a primal need to reassert his dominance, to pull her down from that pedestal, and prove that he was and always would be the more powerful person. Alistair Finch wasn't just going to let this go. He was going to find a way to make Dr. Eris Thorne regret the day she ever crossed him. He just had no idea how badly his plan was about to backfire. For the next day, as the Royal Caledonian majestically carved its way north through the rolling hills of Cumbria and into the rugged landscapes of Scotland, an uneasy peace settled over the train. Eris immersed herself in the sublime luxury of the Balmoral suite. She spent hours in the library reading first editions and sipping tea. She took her meals in her private dining area served by her personal steward, Michael. She was a ghost to the other passengers, a legendary figure whispered about in the dining car. The Finches, on the other hand, became the train's unwilling center of attention. Every polite nod from a fellow passenger felt like a veiled sneer. Every hushed conversation seemed to be about them. Alistair's public humiliation had made him a pariah in the small, closed society of the train. He became withdrawn and sullen, his face a permanent mask of thunderous rage. His assistant's report arrived in a heavily encrypted file. Alistair locked himself in his cabin to read it, the words on the screen causing his blood to run cold, then boil with a malevolent heat. The connection wasn't just social. Silas Blackwood, the reclusive billionaire owner of the train line, was also one of the primary, albeit silent, investors in a massive new green energy initiative by the Scottish government, the North Star Project. It was a multi-billion-pound contract to build a network of advanced solar and battery storage facilities to power the remote highlands and islands completely off-grid. And the frontrunner, the company whose technology was poised to be the heart of the entire project, was Dr. Eris Thorne's Helios Innovations. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. This wasn't a pleasure trip for Eris. The train was taking her directly to the project's proposed central hub in the Highlands for a final site inspection and a meeting with government officials. Blackwood wasn't just giving her a fancy room. He was rolling out the red carpet for the cornerstone of his legacy investment. But for Alistair, This information was a lit stick of dynamite, because one of the smaller subsidiary contracts for the North Star project, a lucrative deal for financial risk management and insurance underwriting, was being sought by a company called McAllister Secure, a firm in which Finch and Sterling Capital held a controlling stake. Finch had been lobbying hard for it, seeing it as an easy, high-profit win. If Helios got the main contract, Eris Thorne would have significant say in the choice of subcontractors. After his performance on the train, the chances of her approving a company linked to him were zero. Less than zero. He wouldn't just be embarrassed. He'd be out tens of millions of pounds. His vendetta was no longer just about ego. It was about money and power. He had to stop her. He had to discredit her sabotage, ruin her. He scrolled further down the dossier to the section marked Vulnerabilities. It was thin. Helios Innovations was a clean company. Thorne ran a tight ship, but there was one small historical footnote. Years ago, in its startup phase, Helios had been in a minor patent dispute with a German competitor, a company called Solgev. The dispute had been settled out of court, with Helios winning decisively, but the initial accusation had been one of intellectual property theft. The claim was baseless, a typical tactic by a larger company to intimidate a smaller rival, but the accusation itself was still on the public record, buried deep in legal archives. An idea ugly and brilliant began to form in Alistair's mind. He wouldn't need to prove the accusation was true. He just needed to revive it. He needed to create smoke, and in the high-stakes world of government contracts, even the hint of fire could be enough to cause a fatal delay. A government committee would get spooked by a whiff of scandal. They might postpone the decision, open a new investigation, and in that delay, he could maneuver McAllister Secure into a better position or back a rival technology firm. He needed a messenger, a tool to deliver the poison. He scrolled through his contacts. He didn't need a real journalist. That would be too risky and traceable. He needed someone pliable, someone with a veneer of credibility, but a core of desperation. His finger stopped on a name, Marcus Cole. Cole was a disgraced financial blogger who had been fired from a reputable journal for fabricating sources. Now he ran a sleazy for-hire blog that specialized in corporate hit pieces masquerading as investigative journalism. He was cheap, he was discreet, and he had no scruples. And as luck would have it, Alistair knew for a fact that Marcus Cole was currently in Edinburgh, just a few hours from the train's next major stop. A cruel, triumphant smile finally broke through Alistair's scowl. Dr. Eris Thorne thought she had won. She was sitting in her palace on wheels, oblivious, thinking she had put the boorish financier in his place. She had no idea that he wasn't just going to tarnish her reputation. He was going to burn her empire to the ground. He picked up his phone and began to compose a message. The trap was about to be set. The final evening on the Royal Caledonian was a formal affair. The train was scheduled to arrive at its final destination the next morning, and the farewell dinner was the social zenith of the journey. The dining car, already a marvel of starched linen, polished silver, and sparkling crystal, was elevated to a new level of opulence. Men were in black tie, women in evening gowns. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Alistair Finch, looking immaculate in his tuxedo, felt a surge of his old confidence return. His plan was in motion. Marcus Cole had boarded at the last stop in Perth, posing as a last-minute passenger. He was seated at a small table in the corner, nursing a drink, looking for all the world like just another traveler. The bait was set. Dr. Eris Thorne made her entrance, and a hush fell over the car. She had chosen to join the other passengers for the final dinner, a quiet statement that she was not hiding away. She wore a simple floor-length gown of deep emerald silk that shimmered under the carriage lights. She wore no ostentatious jewelry, only a pair of diamond stud earrings and a look of serene confidence. She took her seat at a table reserved for her alone, a polite nod to the other diners. Alistair watched her, a predator observing its prey. He waited until the main course had been served, allowing the wine to flow and the atmosphere to become relaxed and convivial. This was the moment for maximum impact. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to Marcus Cole. Cole stood up and began to walk towards Eris's table. He held a small digital recorder in his hand. As he approached, his voice, professionally trained to project, cut through the dining car's gentle hum. "Dr. Eris Thorne," he called out, his tone sharp and accusatory. Eris looked up from her meal, her expression one of mild curiosity. "Yes, Marcus Cole, independent journalist." He announced a self-important lie. "I'm working on a story about the North Star project, and I have to ask, do the Scottish people know their flagship green energy initiative is being spearheaded by a company built on stolen technology?" The string quartet faltered, a violin squeaking in surprise. A fork clattered onto a plate. Every single person in the car turned to stare. This was not a polite question. It was a public execution. Alistair leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk on his lips. This was perfect. The public accusation, the shock, the scandal. Her denial would sound weak. Her anger would make her look guilty. He had her trapped. Eris, however, didn't look angry or trapped. She looked bored. She placed her knife and fork neatly on her plate, took a slow sip of water, and then fixed Marcus Cole with an unblinking stare. "Stolen technology is a very serious allegation, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice remaining perfectly calm. "Which specific technology are you referring to?" Cole, bolstered by the attention, puffed out his chest. "I'm referring to the core patents for your Helios 7 solar cells, patents that bear a striking resemblance to designs pioneered by the German tech firm Solgev, a company that sued you for intellectual property theft in your early days." "Ah, yes, the Solgev case," Eris said, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "You've certainly done your homework, or at least someone has done it for you." She glanced briefly, almost dismissively, in Alistair Finch's direction. Finch's smile faltered. "The case was settled out of court," Cole pressed, trying to regain the momentum. "A classic move to bury the truth and avoid a guilty verdict." "You're mistaken, Mr. Cole," Eris said, her voice hardening slightly. "The case didn't go to trial because Solgev withdrew their lawsuit and issued a formal public apology after our lawyers presented them with the evidence during discovery. Evidence that proved conclusively that their lead engineer had attempted to steal our proprietary research, not the other way around. It's all a matter of public record. If you were a real journalist, you would have found it easily." She reached into her evening bag and pulled out not a phone, but a slim, state-of-the-art tablet. With a few taps, she turned the screen towards Cole. On it was a high-resolution scan of the official court document dismissing the case with prejudice, and below it the signed apology from Solgev's CEO. The air went out of Marcus Cole's sails. He stared at the screen, his face turning pale. He had been given a narrative by Finch, and he had run with it, assuming the target would be unprepared. But Eris wasn't finished. "The real question," she continued, her voice rising in volume so the entire car could hear, "is not about a debunked lawsuit from a decade ago. The real question is why you're bringing it up now. Who paid you to come on this train and stage this little piece of theater, Mr. Cole?" Cole stammered. I'm an independent. Are you—" Eris interrupted, swiping the screen on her tablet. An email appeared. Because my cybersecurity team, who have been monitoring for potential corporate espionage ahead of the North Star decision, flagged an interesting communication. She held up the tablet again. Displayed for all to see was an encrypted message now decrypted. It showed a payment of 50,000 thousands from an offshore account traceable back to a shell corporation. A shell corporation owned by Finch and Sterling Capital. The entire dining car gasped. All eyes swung from the tablet to a now ghostly white Alistair Finch. "This payment," Eris declared, her voice ringing with cold fury, "was made to you, Mr. Cole, just yesterday. The instructions were simple: board this train, publicly ambush me, and create a scandal to derail the North Star contract. A contract, I might add, that a certain Mr. Alistair Finch stands to lose millions on if his subsidiary firm isn't chosen." She stood up her full height, commanding the room. She looked directly at Alistair. "You didn't just laugh at my ticket, Mr. Finch. You tried to destroy my life's work. You tried to sabotage a project that will bring clean energy to thousands of people. All because your fragile ego couldn't handle being wrong. You thought I was in the wrong place, but it is you who is out of your depth." And then came the final brutal checkmate. "You see," she said, turning her attention back to the stunned audience, "when Mr. Blackwood learned of the initial unpleasantness on this journey, he was concerned. He takes the security of his guests very seriously, so he had his team look into Mr. Finch. And they found something far more interesting than a failed attempt at character assassination." She swiped the tablet one last time. A series of trading charts and internal memos appeared on the screen. They found that for the past 6 months, Mr. Finch has been using his firm to illegally short-sell the stock of Helios's main competitor for the North Star project, while simultaneously using insider information to acquire shares in several of the proposed subcontractors, like McAllister Secure. He wasn't just trying to win a contract. He was engaged in a multi-million-pound market manipulation scheme, a scheme that is not only unethical, but highly illegal. The silence in the car was absolute. Alistair Finch sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of pure horror. He had walked into a trap of his own making, and the steel jaws had just snapped shut. From the end of the car, Mr. Davies, the train manager, appeared. He was not alone. Flanking him were 2 grim-faced men in dark suits. They were not train staff. They had the unmistakable bearing of law enforcement. Mr. Davies walked to Alistair's table. "Mr. Finch," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth, "I'm afraid this is your stop. The British Transport Police would like a word." Karma, when it arrives, often does so without pomp or ceremony. It is not a thunderclap, but a quiet, efficient closing of a door. For Alistair Finch, it arrived at an unscheduled stop, at a small bleak station in the middle of the Scottish moors, a place called Dalwhinnie. The mighty Royal Caledonian hissed to a halt under the cold halogen glare of the platform lights. The 2 plainclothes officers from the Transport Police's Economic Crimes Unit were polite but firm. There was no struggle. Alistair stood up like a man in a dream, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. He didn't look at anyone. He couldn't. The weight of 100 pairs of eyes of his peers' people he had sought to dominate, was crushing. Eleanor began to sob, a thin theatrical wail that garnered no sympathy. "Alistair, what is happening? This is a mistake. The only mistake," one of the officers said, grimly, gently taking Alistair's arm, "was thinking you wouldn't get caught." As they escorted him from the dining car, a path clearing before them, as if he were a leper. His eyes met Eris's one last time. There was no triumph in her gaze, no gloating. There was only a profound, weary disappointment. It was the look of a person who had hoped for better from the world, and had once again been shown its ugly, petty underbelly. That look was more damning than any smirk could ever be. It told him he wasn't a worthy adversary. He was just a pathetic footnote. They stepped off the train and onto the desolate platform where a dark car waited. The door of the Royal Caledonian slid shut with a pneumatic sigh, and with a gentle lurch the train began to move, leaving Alistair Finch behind, a fallen king on a forgotten island, his gilded world collapsing into dust under a cold Scottish sky. Back in the dining car, a strange thing happened. After a moment of stunned silence, someone began to clap. It started with one person, then another, until the entire car erupted in a wave of spontaneous, sustained applause. It wasn't for the drama. It was for her. For the grace, intelligence, and steel she had shown. Eris Thorne, a woman who had boarded this train as a target of scorn, was now its undisputed queen. She gave a small, humble nod of acknowledgement, then quietly returned to her seat. The head steward appeared at her elbow. "Dr. Thorne," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "On behalf of the entire staff, dinner is on the house, of course. For the rest of your life, on any of Mr. Blackwood's services." Eris managed a small smile. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary. Just a dessert menu, perhaps. I believe this evening calls for something celebratory." As she enjoyed a slice of chocolate torte, she read the initial news alerts that were already buzzing on her phone. CEO Alistair Finch detained in major market manipulation probe. Finch and Sterling Capital under investigation. Scandal rocks Wall Street. The digital world was already devouring the carcass of his career. Her victory was total, but it felt strangely hollow. She hadn't sought this battle. It had been forced upon her by a man's petty prejudice. Her grandfather had faced men like Finch his entire life, men who saw his skin color and his uniform and rendered him invisible. They had never given him the chance to show the brilliant, dignified man he was. Eris had been given that chance. She had the resources, the intellect, and the platform to fight back in a way her grandfather never could. The fight wasn't just for herself. It was for him. It was for every person who had ever been judged, dismissed, and underestimated. She had not only defended her own honor, she had vindicated his. Later that night, back in the quiet sanctuary of the Balmoral suite, she stood by the panoramic window, watching the wild moonlit landscape of the Highlands race by. The train was a vessel of light and warmth, cutting through the ancient darkness. She thought of her grandfather's dream to simply ride as a passenger. She had done more. She had become the master of the journey. The hard karma that had struck Alistair Finch wasn't just a punishment for his actions on the train. It was a cosmic rebalancing, a debt collected for generations of arrogance and prejudice, finally paid in full on a gilded cage on wheels. The Royal Caledonian slid into Inverness Station the next morning, not with a triumphant roar, but with a quiet, dignified hiss of its brakes. The grand drama of the previous night had dissipated with the morning mist that clung to the Scottish glens. As Eris stepped from the carriage, the air itself felt different. It was crisp and sharp, carrying the scents of pine-damp earth and distant sea salt, a clean, elemental perfume that seemed to wash away the cloying atmosphere of wealth and prejudice that had defined the journey. The world here was older, grander, and utterly indifferent to the petty squabbles of men like Alistair Finch. There was no press gaggle, no throng of reporters. The financial world's earthquake was happening in London and New York in digital spaces and sterile boardrooms. Here on the solid granite platform was only a man in a sturdy tweed jacket and walking boots, his face weathered by the Highland winds. He approached her with a respectful nod, his handshake firm and warm. "Dr. Thorne, Ian MacLeod, North Star Project Liaison," he said, his voice a gentle burr. "Welcome to the Highlands. We've been looking forward to your arrival." There was no mention of the incident yet, a deep, unspoken respect shone in his eyes. News traveled fast. He knew she was not just an innovator, but a fighter. The subsequent days were a whirlwind of activity that felt more real and vital than anything that had transpired on the train. Aris was chauffeured not in a Rolls-Royce, but a rugged Land Rover that capably navigated winding single-track roads through breathtaking landscapes of sweeping moors and deep, mysterious lochs. Her meetings weren't in opulent, mahogany-lined offices, but in practical community-run halls and draftsmen's offices filled with blueprints and geological surveys. The main committee meeting took place in a historic stone building overlooking the River Ness. The room was paneled in dark oak, but the table was modern, surrounded by a dozen serious-faced men and women engineers, ecologists, county councillors, and financial overseers. The chairwoman, a formidable woman named Fiona Campbell, with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled into a tight bun, got straight to the point after the initial pleasantries. "Dr. Thorne," she began, her tone direct, but not unkind. "We have of course been made aware of the unfortunate events that occurred on your journey here, and the subsequent legal proceedings involving Mr. Alistair Finch." A tense silence fell over the room. This was the true test. They needed to know if they were getting into business with a brilliant scientist or a magnet for scandal. Aris met her gaze without flinching. "Mrs. Campbell," she replied, her voice calm and clear. "What Mr. Finch did was a desperate act of corporate sabotage born from personal prejudice. It was ugly and unfortunate. But let me be unequivocally clear. My company Helios Innovations is not defined by the actions of our competitors, nor are we distracted by them. We are defined by our work. We are defined by the technology we have spent over a decade perfecting. A technology that will deliver clean, sustainable, and most importantly, reliable power to the people of the Highlands." She didn't make excuses or dwell on the drama. She pivoted effortlessly and powerfully back to the purpose of her being there. She spent the next 2 hours not as a victim, but as a visionary, laying out the technical specifications, the logistical rollout, and the economic benefits of the Helios system with a passion and precision that left the room spellbound. She answered the skeptical engineers' questions about battery efficiency in sub-zero temperatures and the ecologists' concerns about the construction footprint with a depth of knowledge that demonstrated total mastery. By the end of the presentation, the Finch incident was a forgotten footnote. They didn't see a woman who had been embroiled in a scandal. They saw a leader, a partner they could trust to build the future of their nation. The contract, the largest of its kind in European history, was signed a week later. While Aris was building, Alistair Finch's world was being systematically dismantled. The news reports painted a picture of a catastrophic collapse. The initial charge of market manipulation was merely the tip of the iceberg. The federal investigation into Finch and Sterling Capital uncovered a cesspool of fraud, money laundering, and illegal offshore accounts. The firm didn't just stumble, It imploded, wiped from existence in a matter of weeks, taking the fortunes of its investors with it. Eleanor displaying a ruthless pragmatism Alistair himself would have admired, was the first to abandon the sinking ship. Her lawyers filed for divorce within 48 hours, citing an ironclad prenuptial agreement that insulated her personal wealth from his criminal liability. There were no tearful prison visits, only a cold legal severing of ties. The blogger Marcus Cole, in exchange for a lighter sentence, became the prosecution's star witness, detailing with pathetic clarity how Finch had orchestrated the entire smear campaign. Denied bail as a flight risk with access to hidden funds, Alistair awaited his trial in a cold cell, the fine tailoring of his suits replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit. When the guilty verdict was finally delivered, the sentence of 15 years was met not with shock, but with a quiet affirmation that the system for once had worked. Aris followed the news from a distance with a sense of detached melancholy. There was no joy in witnessing such a complete ruin of a man. One evening, sitting in her temporary home in a small cottage overlooking a wind-swept loch, she thought of her grandfather. She realized that the victory over Finch, as decisive as it was, felt incomplete. Justice had been served, but her purpose was not simply to see the guilty punished. It was to build something better in the world they had left behind. She picked up the phone and called the director of her philanthropic foundation. "I'm establishing a new grant," she said, her voice filled with a newfound clarity. "I want to call it the Thomas Thorne Legacy Grant. Its mission will be to fully fund tuition and living expenses for exceptional students from underprivileged and marginalized communities to pursue advanced degrees in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I don't just want to write a check. I want to build a support system, a mentorship program. I want to find the minds that men like Finch would overlook and give them the resources to change the world." It was the most important deal she would ever make. A year passed. The first gleaming steel skeletons of the Helios North Star project began to rise from the heather-covered moors, a testament to a promise kept. Aris found herself once again on the Royal Caledonian, traveling the same route north. This time, however, she was in the Balmoral suite, not as a guest of honor, but as a partner sitting opposite the man himself, Silas Blackwood. The reclusive billionaire was surprisingly down to earth with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. They sat in comfortable silence for a long while, watching the landscape they were transforming together scroll past the panoramic window. "He was a fool," Blackwood said, suddenly breaking the silence. "Finch. I knew his father, a sharper man. The son inherited the name, but not the sense. He thought the world was a game you win by ensuring others lose." "He thought the world was his," Aris corrected gently, "and that my presence in it was an error he needed to correct." "I backed you for your technology, Dr. Thorne." Blackwood continued, swirling an amber liquid in his glass. "It is without question the best. But I also backed you because I despise men like him. Men who believe their birthright entitles them to dictate the worth of others. They are the anchors of this world, while you are the engine." The train rounded a long curve, and a breathtaking vista opened up. On a distant hillside, thousands of deep blue Helios solar panels shimmered in the afternoon sun, arranged in a vast, silent array. It was a stunning fusion of nature and technology, a vision of a cleaner future taking root in an ancient land. Aris felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She looked at the incredible view then, at the opulent carriage she was sitting in. She thought of her grandfather, Thomas Thorne, who had spent a lifetime on this very train, polishing the brass and carrying the bags of men who never saw him. He would have stood in a narrow vestibule, catching fleeting glimpses of this same scenery between his duties. She was seeing what he saw, but from a place he could only dream of. The journey was the same, but the perspective was a universe apart. Alistair Finch had laughed at her ticket, a simple piece of cardstock. He couldn't see that her true ticket wasn't for a seat on a train. It was one she had forged herself in laboratories and boardrooms, through tireless work and unyielding belief. It was a ticket to a future of her own, making validated not by a conductor, but by the quiet, powerful hum of a world she was helping to build. The journey wasn't over. For her, and for all the others who would follow the path she was now clearing, it was just beginning. And so the story of Alistair Finch and Dr. Eris Thorne comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person isn't the ticket they hold, but the character they possess. Finch, wrapped in privilege, saw the world as a hierarchy he was born to rule. He couldn't comprehend a world where brilliance and hard work could eclipse inherited status, and that blindness led to his downfall. Dr. Thorne, on the other hand, carried the legacy of her grandfather not as a burden, but as a source of quiet strength. She didn't seek a fight, but when it came for her, she was more than prepared. This story shows us that karma isn't always instant, but when it arrives, it can be devastatingly precise. It's a lesson in humility, respect, and the incredible power of underestimating the wrong person. What did you think of Alistair's hard karma? Was it deserved? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And share it with someone who appreciates a good story of justice being served. Most importantly, if you want more true-life stories of drama and satisfying karma, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.